G'day fellas. In this video we're going to be talking about all things water. In my experience, there seems to be two types of players when it comes to water. The first type seeks to avoid it at all costs, and the second type seeks to take it at all costs. When considering the role of water in your game, it's important to be flexible and appreciate that the answer as to whether you should or shouldn't take the water is not always set in stone. Now that the base cost of fishing boats have been reduced to 70 wood in the definitive edition, every civilization can utilize the water. Normally in team games, ideally you want a civilization that specializes in taking water to be utilizing the water, but that doesn't mean that a civilization can't take it if it doesn't specialize in water. In 1 vs 1, the water is typically ignored as a primary strategy in most matchups, but is often utilized once the game draws out past the initial shipment war. The British, the Portuguese, the Indians, and the Japanese all have competitive strategies involving their utilization of water in 1 vs 1. In team games, water is typically taken by one player and one player alone, as the player will include cards to help their water boom, such as schooners, fish market, rendering plant, and whale oil. An example of an exception to this would be where you had a British and a Japanese on the same team. You may have a Japanese player ship fishing boats, but otherwise avoid investing in the water. The British player will then ship the economic water cards despite the fishing boat cards being earlier sent by the Japanese player. When it comes to attacking the water or defending the water, this is a job for the entire team, and it's not something that you can ignore simply because you're not invested in water. The water is a highly relevant tactical element to all maps and needs to be fought for and not conceded easily. Some civilizations are better at fighting on water than other civilizations, with the British, the Portuguese, the Aztec, and the Inca all being tiers above the other civilizations in the game due to the cards that they can ship from their home city. However, as a very strict rule, in both 1v1 and team games, at the very least, when playing on a water map, every single civilization should have at a bare minimum 2 caravels for Age 2 and 1 frigate for Age 3 in their decks, or the equivalent of these shipments for their respective civilizations. In 1 vs 1, these water unit shipments can be used to help contest the water, and in team games, these shipments can be timed with your ally to shut down the enemy water presence and reduce the time that your enemies have to respond to your offensive. There are 3 main types of water booms that you can do. The first is the Age 1 trickle, where you build a single dock before or during transition to the second age, and you train a single fishing boat at a time. The second is the delayed double dock, where you build up a solid land presence before getting your feet wet. Additional docks are not required. And number 3, the big boy boat boom, also known as disregard military, acquire fish. The first is most commonly employed by the Japanese or the Indians through their use of the schooner's equivalent card, East Indiaman, or with the Russians due to their blockhouse and excessive early game wood supply. The second is most commonly seen during a team game after some form of map control has been established, where a civilization like the British will opt to put up a number of docks and do their best to flood the ocean with fishing boats while maintaining unit production and map control. And the third is most commonly undertaken by the Portuguese on maps like Borneo, Malaysia, or Baja California. So now let's talk about each one and how to pull it off. We'll start with the Age 1 trickle. In this Russian game, the first card that I ship is schooners. I age up with the quartermaster, and I put up a dock in transition, which I begin to train fishing boats with. I keep most of my villages on wood, so that I build up enough wood to put down my blockhouse next to my dock to defend it from enemy ships. I wall up to prevent enemy aggression, and behind it, I continue military production, and eventually add a second dock. At 9 minutes, I have 47 villages. Now, let's take a look at the delayed double dock. In this British game, I begin the game playing normally. I send 3 villages, followed by 700 wood, then 600 wood, and then 5 villages. I'm up against Russia, so I open with a stable and I begin to apply early pressure on the map. I make sure that I keep up my unit production even though I'm planning to invest in water. Schooners arrives as my 5th shipment, and my first dock finishes construction at 10 minutes. I then begin to invest heavily in the water, shipping rendering plant, fish market, and whale oil, but continue to produce units as I take the water. By 16 minutes, I have 90 villages. Now finally, let's take a look at the big boy boat boom. In this Portuguese game, I send schooners as my first card. I follow it up with 700 wood, 600 wood, and then rendering plant and whale oil. At 6 minutes, I have 5 docks completed. We start off slow, as we're invested in a lot of infrastructure, with only 24 villages at 6 minutes. By 7 minutes, we're up to 39, and by 8 minutes, we're at 50. By 10 minutes, we're sitting on a comfy 85 villages, and then 2 minutes later, at 12 minutes, I've maxed out my fishing boats completely and have 134 villages. At this point, I'm able to begin slinging resources to my allies that are on the outer positions to help them age up and build more units. I also make sure to hit Imperial before 15 minutes, just for the memes. It's important to note that a big boy boat boom doesn't always have to be early game. It can be done in the mid game or even the late game as a form of Hail Mary. When considering water, it's important that you tell your teammates what you're doing, as to heavily invest in your economy this way leaves you vulnerable to an attack in the short term. So, what do you do if you spot that your opponent is heavily investing in water? You've got 2 main options. The first one is you can kill them before their water boom pays off. The second is kill their water boom before it pays off. Often, the best response is a combination of both, and if you time it right, you can send your opponent off balance and ruin their tempo. You hit them on land first, distracting them, while at the same time building up docks and outposts on the shoreline while you begin to train frigates or caravels. If an opponent is taken out, for the most part on land, but still retains complete control of the water, they will typically continue fighting on, so it's important that you attack them on both fronts. In this game, I'm playing Sweden and my ally is playing Dutch. We're up against the British and the Japanese. We're playing on the map Florida, which has a large sea with both whales and fish. Both enemy civilizations are top tier water booming civilizations, and the British especially have a strong navy, so it's important that throughout the early game, that my ally and I are scouting the coastline. I ask my ally to send his envoy up and down the coast near their bases to scout for docks, and not long after, we spot the docks. So, what is my reaction to this situation? At first glance, it appears that there's only 2 docks, so I say to myself, alright, we can focus on burning these docks down, that way we're going to slow down the water boom of our opponent, and they're not going to be able to leverage their economy against us. But shortly after, we scout the 3rd and the 4th docks, and it becomes clear to us that they're doing a big boy boat boom, and this leaves us only 2 options. Kill the water boom completely, or kill the enemy completely. I let my ally know I'm going to plan to hit industrial as quickly as possible, and once I hit there, we're going to ship heavy cannons, we're going to attack the opponent. We've got a plan of attack that we're going to be setting in motion, and I need you to focus completely on military production at this point. Because the enemy has heavily invested resources into 4 docks, as well as fishing boats, it's going to take quite some time before they're actually able to start seeing a return on their investment. So it's important that we attack with haste. We push into the enemy's town centre, clearing it out, taking out the stables and taking out all the surrounding infrastructure. At the same time, I begin putting docks along the shoreline where I plan on building frigates. When the enemy scouts that I'm putting up docks, he begins to send caravels over, to which my response is that I begin placing outposts along the shoreline to defend my docks. With each of my docks, I'm training a single frigate, and when all 3 of the frigates pop out, the enemy realizes that this game can no longer continue, because the one hope that they had, which was the water, has now been taken from them. When you're fighting on water against the opponent, it's important that you avoid training galleons and primarily use caravels and frigates. Training galleons is incredibly expensive, and the bang for buck that you get as a warship is really not worth it. In the event that you've maxed out on caravels and you're in H2, you can train galleons. In the event that you're in H3 and you've maxed out on frigates and on caravels, then you can train galleons. Otherwise, it's best to avoid fighting with galleons. If you see your enemy putting up outposts on the shore, make sure you target either their settlers or the outpost itself before it finishes construction. If you target an enemy building while it's under construction, you will do 4 times the damage you normally would as to when it's completed construction. So it's important that you focus down the building if it's unlikely you're able to kill the settlers that are constructing the building first. If you're playing on maps like New England or Saguenay, where in the middle of the water there is a small island, don't be afraid to send a couple of villages over in either a fishing boat or a caravel and construct outposts on the island. Outposts have an incredibly long range against warships, and by putting up an outpost on a small island, it allows you to control a large section of water. So whenever you've got the option to do so, it's important to do it. If you're planning on using Outposts against enemy ships, it's important that you research the Heated Shot upgrade from the arsenal, which increases anti-ship attack damage from your buildings by 50%. If you're planning on taking water in a game and think you might be up against an enemy who's going to fight you for it, a very strong card to include in your deck is the Advanced Dock card, as it increases the damage that your dock does against ships, and also increases the healing rate of your warships when they're garrisoned next to your docks. When your warships are low on health, instead of letting them die to the enemy fire, it's important to return them back to your docks so that they can heal up. If you're unsure of what cards to include in your deck, I encourage you to join our Discord, where you can inspect my deck picks, where I've got water and land decks for every single civilization for both team games and for 1v1. I hope that you've been able to take something away from this video, and it's taught you a thing or two about how to play on water. Other than that, thank you very much for watching.